Gamecock Nation, how we doing? Welcome in Monday episode of GC Live. I am Wes Mitchell. He is Chris Clark. This is, as always, brought to you by our good buddy Clint Hammond of the Mortgage Network. Go check out clinthammond.com for any and all of your mortgage needs. If you are in the market for a new home, or maybe you're just thinking about making a first-time home buyer purchase, hit up Clint. He can help walk you through the process, tell you what you need to know, tell you what you don't need to know. 803-422-6797. is Clint's mobile phone. If you want to text him your Gamecock thoughts on the game, you can do that as well. NMLS number 71597. Email address is chammond@mortgagenetwork.com. Welcome in. Plenty to get to, Chris. We went into the weekend, at least I did, wanting new information to talk about. And I felt like we've been talking about the same information for I don't know, at least 3 weeks. So I was like, we need something new. We need some surprising things. We need some confirmations. We need some questions answered. The Gamecocks, as always, you get a little bit. You don't get the full picture yet, but we now have one game, one day, 60 minutes of data from South Carolina's 35-14 win over Georgia State. Chris, I exited Williams-Brice Stadium Saturday night feeling a little bit unsure of how I should feel. What are your first initial thoughts on the opener?
You felt unsure of how you should feel. That is actually perfect, even though it sounds kind of funny. There's a lot to unpack, man. And I think this is what I've come back to, and we're going to get more into the weeds of the actual game itself and what those things may mean. But my kind of big picture takeaway is, like, I agree with what you're saying. I think I predicted, keep forgetting, 31-17 Carolina in this game. So I predicted a 14-point margin. It ended up being a little bit more than that. And I think some of the things that maybe I expected going into the game we saw. And I think there were some other things that maybe I didn't anticipate. Didn't certainly anticipate 2 special team scores and that many big plays on special teams. Maybe we should have. Maybe I should have. So there were some differences in terms of how they got there. The one thing that I thought going into the weekend was I thought South Carolina would end up winning comfortably later in the game, that it would become a comfortable win, which it was. But I thought there would be some tense moments in the game, and there were. We saw both of those things. Maybe it was a little bit different in terms of the path that I thought, but certainly there were some offensive struggles. There are a couple groany moments on defense and things like that that we were kind of laughing about going into the game. But yeah, I mean, I still don't know. I think we still have a lot to learn about this team. I'll put it that way. I don't know, even though we have a sample size and now we have some stuff on tape, so to speak, and some new information, as you said, I think there's still a lot more information to find out about this team.
Sorry, y'all. We just, my computer just, I don't know, almost blew up in my face, I think. But I was clicking unmute, and it was
happened to me. Happened to me last show, I think.
So anyway, Chris, I thought stock up Mitch Jeter. How about that? I'm saying him first because somebody just mentioned him, but we went into this thing like, who knows what to expect from kicker. And, there's 2 kickers, and I was like kind of thinking privately, well, if you have 2, do you have 1? You know what I mean? That whole thing of like, if you have 2, you probably don't have a guy. And Jeter goes out there and drills 2 50-yarders. So stock up for him. Talk about a confidence booster for your kicker. Special teams overall, yes, you could not have anticipated. You can never predict 2 block punts, especially, this is the first year Elliott, I believe, has had a true special teams coordinator. And so they had put that as a big focus going in. You could tell. I don't know how many of y'all watched Sean Elliott's post game. Actually, quite a bit of you did. I can tell you that. That was one of our most viewed things over the weekend. People were very intrigued to hear from Sean Elliott. Chris, he looked like he was going to be sick when he was talking about their special teams miscue. And he made the comment, hey, we played them toe-to-toe. He felt like they played them toe-to-toe, offense and defense. And then what's the big, difference maker there? Special teams. You give up 2 block punts. You give up a fake field goal for a first down. And I didn't know, Chris, that they were going to fake it, but I was watching Shane Beamer's body language on the fourth, when it became 4th down. And I said out loud, I said, they may go for this, but you could just tell there was a little, not frustration, but the body language was like, I'm ready to score, and I'm not talking about kicking a field goal. So I thought they might just say, screw it, line up and go for it. And then next thing you know, they fake it. Man, you knew they faked the PAT game 1 last year. This is a group that is fully willing to be aggressive on special teams, and they faked the field goal on you down there. It was a short field goal, not one that you should have been really trying to block anyway, necessarily early in the game. The 2 blocked punts, I mean, that as impressive as it was from a South Carolina side, miserable from a Georgia State side, to feel like you're in the game, and they very much were, and you lose because of that. Once again, Pete Limbo's special teams, Chris, proves to be a difference maker.
Yeah, the team, it's clear that the team is completely bought into special teams. There are a lot of coaches, there's not a coach out there that's not going to sit in a press conference and say, special teams is a third of the game. It's very important to us. We spend a lot of time on it. They're all going to say those things. I mean, you could just basically just copy and paste the answer. And Beamer is going to say similar things to that, but they live it out. And the thing about how they practice special teams is it's not just like spending time on it in practice. It's kind of integrating how they're going to play on special teams into everything they do, such that a lot of the special teams drills they're doing carry over to how they play offense and defense and vice versa. So it's really woven into the fabric, of that moment. And you're right. Beamer, it may be a little frustration or, antsiness, whatever it was. He kind of walked on the field, was looking around at everybody, and then, finally sent the field goal on. But they were extremely aggressive in the game. Obviously, they wanted to, they're not always going for a block on the punt, but Shane Beamer mentioned they always wanted to pressure the punter one way or another. They did that, throughout the game, but they also came away with the 2 blocks. I think we almost forget not only the 2 punt blocks and the fake field goal, but, they did have the 1 negative play with the bad snap, but they tried the onside kick also. I mean, just super aggressive. And you always have to be, I think teams that play South Carolina have to be on guard more than probably most other teams they play in terms of special teams. Maybe it's not the electricity of the returners, right? But just being constantly worried that you're schematically going to get beaten, and then get beaten and execute. It's not just the scheme. The players do a really good job of executing it, which goes back to the way they're being taught to do it and how much of an emphasis it is.
Well, and that in itself is an advantage for you, because maybe you force an opponent each week to spend a little extra time preparing for stuff like that. I mean, I've always heard coaches say offensively, maybe you give teams a look or a trick play, not even necessarily to hit in that circumstance, just to give them something else to prepare for and look for. But I thought, Chris, that's something you have to be aware if you're a South Carolina's opponent, that could be coming. that in itself maybe opens up another opportunity for you in special teams. Maybe you get a better return because they're so worried about, protecting against a punt block potentially. Let's see. We've got some really good comments so far, Chris. The KC Shug says, just the first game, Rattler in a new system. Overall, I was pleased. We didn't show everything on offense. O-line needs to be better. There was another comment and something I have thought about, Chris, that I haven't verbalized yet. And I wasn't even necessarily going to say it, but I will, because it's going to sound kind of like an excuse. But Brandon makes a good point. He said, I struggled to be elated with special teams, and I'm going to fix this for you, Brandon. I think he's elated with special teams, but deflated by blocking. But should we think of special teams cannibalizing offensive opportunities? Yet there, you did take away a couple of opportunities late for the offense to get a possession and score by just blocking the punt and scoring yourself. So, yes, valid to say you scored 35 points, but 2 of the touchdowns were by the special teams units. It's worth noting it gives you 2 less possessions, I guess. Now, however, we don't know if the offense would have scored or not scored in those 2 possessions. And it doesn't change the fact, let's go into some of the less than pretty things now, Chris. Doesn't change the fact that you're blocking on offense really across the board. Was not what I'm sure South Carolina had hoped. And frankly, even though I know Georgia State is very, very good, they're actually great at stopping the run for their level. Chris, I thought there would be a little more room to operate running game wise and on the perimeter.
Well, and South Carolina built its game plan, and Shane Beamer said this around, I think he went to it on Sunday night in his teleconference a lot. They built their game plan around being able to do more on the perimeter. Now, Carolina fans may say, and I've wondered the same thing, kind of why is that? Well, we don't know, other than obviously that's what they thought was best. My estimation is that they probably thought that was a better matchup for them based on what they can do and probably what Georgia State does on defense. And if you watch back, Wes, I know both of us, I've completed a rewatch this morning after seeing it live. In theory and in concept, I can see why attacking the perimeter might have been a point of emphasis, because the plays were there a lot of times. But I think the perimeter blocking, meaning tight ends and receivers on both outside runs and in the quick game and the screen game, it was every bit as poor as whatever we think of the offensive line. And so when we think about the blocking for this game, we really do need to think of it in those terms. And there were issues with both. But I think the perimeter blocking by those position players, not the offensive line, has almost gone a little bit like that's something we need to shed light on, because it is going to be critical this season that they're able to do that. Now, another part of the game plan may have been, look, they're missing Christian Beal-Smith. Marshawn Lloyd showed us some glimpses of what he can do in this game. And thinking about it, they're outside runs. That's his forte, bouncing outside. Juju McDowell, what's his best run? Outside runs. Mm-hmm. So, some of their Jaheim Bell, good in space, in the flats. So it made sense, but far too often they were beat to their spot by defenders. They didn't make their blocks. And so it was tough sledding, and that's something that they're going to have to get corrected or find a way to mask, throughout the rest of this season. Could it be a one-game aberration? Maybe so, but it definitely wasn't good enough in game 1.
Yeah, and the perimeter blocking, that's something that this group kind of prides themselves on. Like, that's a huge priority within this program. So I'm sure not fun moments on Sunday film review as far as some of that stuff goes. But I do, Chris, I tend to think some of that stuff is going to get cleaned up. I think the bigger issue is when they were trying to run the football inside and just could not get movement like that.
Yep.
that should be concerning quite a bit, I think, because I thought going into year 2 now, there was going to be just a greater comfort level that was going to then lead to more success up front. Again, I'm very strongly in the hey, it is one game category, fully willing to wait and see what happens, but also not going to completely discount it and just pretend, that it was great either. There were a lot of positives from this game, I think. But then I feel like the negatives were like fairly big, fairly concerning negatives, which is the scary thing for South Carolina fans. I didn't even complete off my list. Jalen Brooks, big stock up. Marshawn Lloyd, stock up. Nick Imamori, and a lot of these, maybe I shouldn't even say stock up. I should just say confirmed what we thought. Nick Imamori confirmed. Mo Kaba, I thought was extremely active, Chris. You know who I thought up front, like quietly was pretty disruptive, was Jordan Birch. It seemed like
It
he
was.
made some plays. I thought he had a pretty solid day. Overall, and one of the comments said nobody's talking about the defense. We're talking about the defense. We're going to talk about the defense. I thought overall, for a group that, yes, we have high expectations for him, Chris, you're still talking about a defensive line that has had to replace actually 3 starters from last year. Granted, these were all guys that played quite a bit last year. Boogie didn't really, but the 2 edge guys did. Zach Pickens did. And then, Mo Kaba is a new starter as well. One of your safeties is a new starter, is a transfer, new player. By the second drive, both of your safeties were new players. So, I tend to say, all right, we had pretty high expectations for these guys. We have to remember this was their first game ever together as a unit. I thought the defense was encouraging. Like I felt like from that first drive on, they had the big run, they had a couple of gash runs in that first drive. As the game progressed, there was a stretch where they played extremely well. All hats to the football, covered up against the run much better, let their linebackers roam and make plays. I thought it was pretty solid on the defensive side.
Yeah, I think the biggest concern in this game, Wes, from when I was looking at it defensively for South Carolina, wasn't even what we saw with a few explosive plays. They didn't have a bunch. They had a few. They had one long pass, right, that was a competitive 50-50 ball. They came away with it. Good play by the receiver. And they had a few longer runs. But that was it. And I think the bigger concern for South Carolina wasn't even the explosive runs. It was just them 6-yarding you to death. That's what you had to avoid. And as you pointed out, with the number of 3 and outs that South Carolina was able to force, and then when they were able to bow up, the 4th down stop early in the game, a prime example of that was huge. They had some explosive plays, they had some, some of those shorter but still very substantial gains on that drive. Those were the big plays. So I do think there were some things. I want to go back to offense too in a little while, by the way. Defensively, I agree. Zach Pickens, I think as the game went on, became more and more disruptive. Boogie Huntley looked solid. Strachan and Birch, I think South Carolina's pressure was able, what was Granger, 7 of 29? Not extremely efficient. Forced some errant throws, forced some quicker throws, I think, than he wanted. And they were able to, while they gave up, you could say they gave up too many rushing yards and too many explosives. Still a to be determined, in terms of this rush defense. But I thought a net positive in that game based on what we saw. Gilbert Edmond got in, did some things, looked quick. And here's a big one. Linebacker depth. We talked about it coming into the season, how we thought it would be better. I don't want to completely, mark that down in permanent marker, but I really think it is a better situation. Shirai Green didn't play at all, but we still saw more depth. Mo Kaba looked very quick out there. Brad Johnson had a good game. Shane Beamer said what he named him the defensive player of the game, I think.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, defensive.
So he had a good game. Physical presence out there. We saw Stone Blanton get in. Debo Williams was very active. So they've got especially when Green comes back, they've got 5 or 6 guys they feel good about at linebacker. So, yeah, I thought that was the biggest takeaway I had, is that they were able to control more of what Georgia State wanted to do and limit their possessions and the time that they had the football.
Yeah, Stone Blanton is a massive dude, by the way. Huge dude. He got in late. TJ Sanders, I think, got in at defensive tackle a little bit late. They were able to kind of rotate some guys in. The pressure, to me, Chris, was not the sack numbers were not indicative of what the actual pressure on Granger was. Like I felt like not that he had pressure on every single play, but there was pretty consistent pressure when he had to actually drop back. Your guy Gilbert Edmond, as you said, he went firing off the ball at one point. And there was a play where he and Tyreek Johnson were in the field at the same time, and they both just whipped their guy, and then were like about to meet in the middle at the quarterback. So good for Tyreek, kid that's waited his turn, worked through injuries, maybe was kind of on that track where you thought, realistically, he may not ever be able to like make a big contribution here, and has hung in there, is playing on the second team on the defensive front. I thought, Chris, you could tell, as we've talked about, you can tell what spots the coaches feel really good about their depth based on rotations. And it seemed like up front, fairly early on, MJ Webb was in the game. Tonka Hemingway was in the game. A little bit later on, Gilbert Edmond was in the game at edge. Tyreek Johnson was in the game at edge. Debo Williams was in the game at linebacker. DQ Smith was in the game at safety. As we know, Eamon Worry was in the game at safety, necessitated by injury. We saw some rotation at nickel with Spalding getting in the game. We didn't see the rotation yet at cornerback, except for when Darius Rush got banged up. For most of the actual key minutes in this game, they kept those guys on the field. But that is kind of our expectation, right? I feel like that's kind of how we thought it was, as far as the spots you feel good about versus the spots that are a little bit more thin.
Yeah, I mean, you would anticipate that DQ Smith and Nick Eamon, both true freshmen, both from Columbia area, are gonna probably continue that, right? I mean, DQ Smith obviously ran a punt block, the punt that Rashad Amos blocked. He ran that back, got plenty of snaps. Nick Eamon, Wes, like you said, necessitated by injury when RJ Roderick went down, but made an immediate impact. I think the second play he was out there, the 4th down stop, which was critical, ended up playing the second most snaps on the defense. I think Cam Smith was number 1, Eamon Morey was number 2. And so regardless of the injury situation to Roderick, if he continues coming along and being productive, it may be hard to keep him out of the starting lineup ultimately. So, yeah, I think that's something we saw. I mean, you feel great if you're a South Carolina fan that you have more depth at safety than you've had, even if it's 2 true freshmen. If they feel like they're good enough to put out there, and they may indeed be, that's a huge kind of weight off your shoulders. It makes you feel a lot better. Certainly at linebacker, they've got more guys they can trust. And if Gilbert Edmond, Tyreek Johnson can play well behind the starters, and if Birch and Straughn are playing well, we know they've got some guys at tackle. You feel a lot better about being able to stay fresh defensively, which was an issue, at times last year.
Yeah, DQ smelled the end zone on that punt block too. That was that was an awesome play for him. I mean, anytime. I mean, the sideline was just insane on both of those block punts. And by the way, be on the lookout for my interview coming up, presented by Garnet Trust with Darius Rush. We talked about those guys a little bit. Darius was absolutely thrilled for DQ. Like, you can tell these young guys. It's kind of interesting when the young guys come up and the older guys can sense it. Like, they can smell it. They know who is ready to help. And Darius talked about DQ, talked about Nick, talked about Kawan Banks. And, these guys have already earned a great deal of respect among their more veteran, more experienced teammates. And so those guys are going to play. And man, we've talked about Nick a ton going into the season. So I don't think it's a surprise, but it's one of those things you like to see it confirmed for yourself, like with your own eyeballs. He may be better than I anticipated. There were a couple of plays where he was making a jump on the ball at his size. The explosive, quick twitch, athletic ability, both coming up against the run, but also breaking on passes. Could be pretty special, I think.
He's got great athletic ability and he's huge, and he just has a really good feel for the game. The guy's just a football player. I think that's how Shane Beamer described DQ Smith. He gave him the very, that's high praise is what I'm trying to say. Couldn't spit it out, but I mean, I think you made that point. If you get called a football player by a coach, you're doing something right. But Nick's in that same boat. I mean, this guy played, safety, linebacker, defensive end, wide receiver. Like, he played a bunch of positions at the high school level because he's kind of a unicorn type of player. I mean, he can even little small things. I noticed, I mean, he had a tackle. I think it was on a first down run, but he was coming from across the field. And, the Georgia State running back, it might have been Jemias Williams, tried to almost give him a little shake, and Nick just didn't bite on it. He was able to stop himself and keep the angle. Like, there's just little things there that you might not expect young players to be able to have. He just got it, And so these two guys, the funny thing, Wes, so Eamon Smith, Kawan Banks, those are probably the guys that weren't getting talked about. Like, they were deemed like the back half of the 2022 class because you had Anthony Rose, Emory Floyd Jr., Keenan Nelson Jr. Those are the three 4-star guys. So everybody's talking about them. Rose enrolled early. Well, these three guys, especially Banks, they're just like, no, I'm gonna be the one, playing. Kawan Banks, scrappy, not a big dude, but he's out there playing. That's a great sign for the future of the secondary.
Yeah, I mean, I would say especially DQ and Kawan Banks. I think with Eamon regardless of whatever he was ranked,
right,
in-house, I think Carolina kind of knew. They're like, all right, we got a guy that's got a chance. But I mean, DQ was a late blue shirt take. I mean, DQ did not sign on signing day. He enrolled. So very late take. He was a quarterback in high school. But man, that just tells you what the upside is. If this guy can get ready to play at the SEC level this quickly, come in playing quarterback, I mean, the sky is the limit for this kid. And then Banks, I mean, Georgia State did what good OCs do. Darius Rush has to come out of the game. He gets banged up. Banks goes in. What do? Let's go pick on the little freshman. Gets a pass breakup, the first play of his career, I'm pretty sure, as far as defense goes. I think he was out there on some special teams. But, yeah, that's a mindset, man. That was impressive. So those guys, I think, are going to play quite a bit for South Carolina. We're going to go back to the offense in a second, guys. But final thought on the defense, that early 4th and 1 stop set the tone for the entire game, I think, defensively. But how about the team effort on that play? Zach Pickens smashing his guy into the backfield. Chris, you made this point on the radio show. Mo Kaba comes flying out of a cannon, blows up the play. I mean, then you have, I guess, Nick cleaning it up. I mean, that was impressive. They dialed. I mean, they gave up a couple of big plays early on, but then they dialed in and they could smell it that they had a chance to get off the field, I feel like, on that 3rd down and that 4th down.
They played aggressively on defense, which was kind of cool to see. I mean, you go back and look at 3rd downs, which they were able to force a good many. And yeah, they didn't get to Granger. And I think part of that is style of play. We knew the book on Granger is he does not make a lot of mistakes. What was the Kendall stat? 4 interceptions. I think he's like 288 attempts. Doesn't put the ball in danger a lot. Gets it out quickly. So we saw that. But if you're making him throw it quickly, you've got some good coverage guys like South Carolina does. That's a positive for you. So they were dialing it up. The linebackers were flying around. You look at how they chased the ball to the perimeter. It was pretty impressive. One of the longer runs was right up the middle. You know, they just got kind of a hat on a hat and gashed them a little bit. But, yeah, they were aggressive all game. You look at the defensive backs even. Got a couple PIs, you know, in there. Marcellus Dial got beat on one deep ball, but the theme was they were aggressive. There was only one play, really, that they gave up in the passing game where it wasn't a very, very contested play. And that's what you want. You want your guys to be in position to make a play. Wes, before we move back to wherever you're taking us next, I want to make sure we mention some of the guys that played, right, defensively. Also, freshmen, there were 3 more guys that played on special teams only. Donovan Westmoreland, Keenan Nelson Jr., and Xavier Short from Chapin. Those 3 guys did see some special team snaps on Saturday night too. So just another little something to watch there. I know Shane Beamer and Pete Limbo both said a bunch of guys were going to play on special teams. We figured it would be that kind of core 4, the 3 DBs, and then Stone Blanton. All those guys also played, but those other 3. So they did. They played 7 true freshmen, you know, on special teams or defense on Saturday.
Had a question about DeCarrion Joyner, why he wasn't on the field. He is dealing with a little bit of a calf injury. Got in there for one play. It was like so random because he hadn't played at all. We had heard he was banged up. So I wasn't expecting him to play. Then I think it was like third quarter, man. It was later in the game. I was like, oh, Joyner's in. And I almost for a moment thought, is this a trick play? Like, is this going to be, did they put him in to throw a double pass or something? But I don't remember what the play call was. But then I think he was right back out after that play. Let's see. Got any more questions right now? Yeah, Brian asked about Isaiah Norris. Has he been passed on the depth chart? Yes, that's a good question. I guess so. It looked like for a stretch last year, you know, Isaiah was kind of the next in line. We saw him play in the bowl game. But yeah, not on the field really much at all as far as the DB rotation, I should say. Marshawn Lloyd, man, he's got a little more power, like a little more thump than I think you necessarily expect from him. We knew he was going to be quick when he came in. He had the injury. He looks back to himself, I feel like.
Well, he kind of brought his entire bag of tricks just about. And obviously the opportunities were more limited for him in the run game as far as how many, you know, looks he got. And 2 of his best plays were in the passing game. He had the one, what was kind of like a little angle route type of thing. First play of the game, 15 yards. And then he had the pass, you know, where he caught the ball out in the flat, just a quick throw from Spencer Rattler. Easily made a guy miss. I mean, just made it look easy. But you look at a lot of the other plays. I mean, the touchdown that he scored on the little quick pitch, just having the quickness and speed to beat the guy to the pylon and the balance to keep yourself in bounds and hit the pylon. You look at the hurdle play. You're right, running hard, you know, even when he's got some guys on him. So he's not just a finesse runner. So that was great to see Marshawn out there looking fully healthy, looking like the kind of high school 5-star recruit Marshawn. I anticipate more big plays from him this season, and that was really good to see.
Rattler, South Carolina debut. Chris, I thought it was kind of twofold, man. Like for one, there's some plays I'm sure if we had Spence on, he would want back. There were also some plays where I said Rattler gives this offense a chance. You know, like I thought, you know, we had very much anticipated, and I think told people to anticipate his ability outside the pocket, on the edge, to move around, then throw the football is kind of maybe his most elite trait, in my opinion. And we saw that both on, a design play action rollout, the way he could get the ball out. There's one to Antoine Wells, I think, on the first drive of the game that was a seed. The big throw to Jalen Brooks. There was a throw where he sort of rolled to his left. I think this was the drive right after Georgia State had scored and taken the lead, and South Carolina had their best offensive drive of the game. Rattler avoided pressure and then just flicked the ball out and ended up going for a big gain. His ability to just create things is what's going to give this offense the chance. I think the fact that he didn't even play his absolute best, but he still threw for, I think, 230 yards, Chris, made some big plays with some upside to go, speaks on why you probably shouldn't give up on this offense after one game. I also left myself thinking, man, if they could just give him a little bit of running game moving forward to take a little bit of that pressure off, then he's going to give them a chance, because we got to remember, this was his first game in this offense. Yes, he's played a lot of ball in his career. Yes, he did have a full season under this belt at Oklahoma. This is very, very different as far as offensive scheme and what he's being asked to do.
Yeah, and look, he looked in command during the game in terms of how he administered the offense. But you're right, there were some plays that I think he would want back. I found it interesting, Wes, that after the game, I don't know if you guys, I always try to catch Todd Ellis's locker room report with the coaches on 107.5 after the game. Every now and then there'll be, something different than just the press conference. And Shane Beamer, I'm pretty sure the exact way he said it was, Todd asked him how he thought Spencer played, and he mentioned some of those same things. Hey, it's the first game. And Beamer said, I thought he played okay. And so that, I think both those things are true. He actually played better than I thought when I went back and rewatched, because of what you said, Wes. His ability to make some plays and throws that, quite frankly, nobody else on the roster can make or do, it is going to give them a chance. He's a guy that can bail you out in a lot of situations. The ability, I got to wonder if they're going to start moving the pocket more just by design, because his ability to roll out, I mean, that should be in the bag for next week and the whole season. It is absolutely elite. Some of his best plays of the game came in that. When he did get some time, when Georgia State brought like a 4-man pressure, he was able to deliver some balls, a couple of them. One was the Stogner push-off, one Josh Van dropped. He made some other big throws. So I think from an arm talent standpoint, we saw it. Navigating the pocket, buying time, we saw that. And I think it's something for Rattler to build on. I don't think that's all of what he is, but he showed us, some glimpses of that.
Yeah, and I think I was thinking of those exact plays you just mentioned, man. The Stog push off, the Van drop. I mean, there were some things in the passing game, Chris, that I think were just, just a hair off. Like, probably stuff that gets cleaned up, that gets fixed. The interception that was thrown to Marion Brown, it's the ball's out late, the ball's high, but it does hit his fingertips. If like, it had to be a perfect bad storm on that one. You know what I mean? Like, if the ball's a little bit higher, if Amari makes a little bit better catch, if the ball's thrown a little bit quicker, if one of those three things is a little bit better, it might be incomplete, but it's probably not picked off, So that's just kind of a game one, trying to get on the same page. I think one of the last things Beamer said last week in his Tuesday presser, when he was asked, like, what are you not concerned about, but kind of looking forward to learning or seeing as the season goes on. One of the things that surprised me a little bit, Chris, was when he said, hey, these receivers and this quarterback have not played together before. And he mentioned they were still working on their timing. So I think there are little things with the passing game that are going to clean up relatively quickly.
And I think, Wes, that he was pressing. I think Spencer even said that. He pressed on some plays.
Mm.
And we knew coming into this year that Spencer was going to have more pressure on him than he did at Oklahoma, whether that was scheme, the supporting cast around him. In game one, it would be easy for him in that situation to press a little bit. And like the interception to Juice Wells, I get the sense that there was a little bit of a disconnect on what Spencer thought Juice Wells was going to do, just judging on the body language afterwards. But Spencer also cited that as the one throw he wanted back. You know, he could have run it, which he said. He also had Juju right there. I think it was a 3rd and 2, wasn't it? Forced that one. One of the downfield throws, he tried Josh Vann one-on-one, which is not a bad idea, but he had Trey Kenyon in the flat. There were a couple times where he didn't recognize like a nickel or corner blitz and maybe needed to get it out faster, check it down. But those are things that, again, I mean, you're talking about getting a little nitpicky, you know, on a guy that can, if the other stuff around that can get fixed more, then I think you're going to continue to see him make some of the type of plays that kind of define how talented Spencer Rattler is.
Yeah, I think just knowing when to take your shots, when to drop it off to Juju on that third down, like you got to just drop it off to Juju. And I imagine that was one of those things. As soon as it happened, Spencer was probably like, "Why did I do that?" You know, because you had the lead. It was a 3rd and short. There's plenty of room. Juju's going to run for 15 more yards, possibly, if I remember correct on that play. But anyway, yeah, solid debut, man. Like I don't care about the numbers or the QBR or whatever that other BS is. He gave the offense a chance when they could not run the football. So there's something to be said for your quarterback having to deal with 3rd and like 9 yards every 3rd down, you know. And the ball to Josh Vann that Josh couldn't hold on to was a freaking missile, too.
How about the one? I mean, Jalen Brooks. How about the one he caught from Spencer? An absolute, it like just manifested itself in front of his hands. It got there so fast, and the body control on that one might have been just as impressive as that layout catch he had on the sideline. That was not an easy ball to catch.
Yeah, and so how about Jalen Brooks?
Yeah.
I mean, you know, Chris, we kind of joke on the other show, on the radio show. I know Preston Thorne hates the oars on depth chart oars. I thought the oars were vindicated this week.
They were.
There was a reason that it was Leggett and Wells, a reason it was Amarian Brown, DeCarrion Joyner. But we also found out that the Jalen Brooks, Josh Vann, or was not, that it had a reason too, that it had a point, you know? Jalen Brooks looked like a guy with something to prove.
He did. I mean, what was it? 5 catches. The layout catch on the sideline was, I mean, great throw by Spencer because that was Jalen's catching this or nobody's catching it. And look, to say what I've been thinking, and maybe others are, Jalen had some struggles earlier in his career with consistency in terms of his hands, and he looked very reliable on Saturday night. You know, he had the layout catch. He had the one I cited from Spencer that was like, I mean, that thing was coming hot. It was like you're standing 2 feet in front of a jugs machine or something, and he was able to snag that one. He had the other. Wes almost had a touchdown. You know, that little across the middle play. I think it was on maybe a 2nd and 16 or something like that. Caught the ball from Spencer in stride. If he got one more block,
A little shallow cross.
Yeah, a little shallow cross. He may have been running for a touchdown on that one. So did a really nice job, and that was great to see. You know, a lot of other receivers, whether it's Vann or Xavier Leggett, who had a quiet night, or Brown or whoever it may be, the transfer guys. Jalen Brooks kind of got lost a little bit, but he showed that he has the ability to be a significant part of the offense.
Definitely, man. By the way, y'all, as you know, this show is not only presented by our good buddy Clint Hammond, but also is sponsored by our friends at Liberty Tax right here in Columbia. They'll help you overcome your tax anxiety at 803-462-5567. 5576. Of course, tax time is over, but if you own a small business and you need advice, maybe some bookkeeping and payroll services for LLCs, S Corps, C Corps, or if you unfortunately owe money to the IRS, you can meet with a local pro to represent you in settling your debt rather than calling a stranger on a late night 1-800 number. They've got a new location at 551 St. Andrews Road. They've got a Lexington office at 1123 South Lake Drive, and they have an Irmo office by the Kroger at 7467 St. Andrews Road. Again, 803-462-5576. Overcome your taxiety with our friends at Liberty Tax. Chris, what have we not covered, man?
Whew. Should we talk a little bit more about, we talked about perimeter blocking. We talked about the offensive line. We touched on it. But what is, shout out Dalton, good strategy. What is the problem though? Do we know? Here's, let me reiterate a point I made earlier on the Gamecock Central Takeover Hour. I think one of the reasons that people are so concerned, probably the primary reason, is that they're not just taking this one game sample size. Mm-hmm. Shane Beamer has said that they would, he's not going to overreact. We know that fans will overreact on one play out of an entire season, which is great. That's why they're fans. And we love them all. But if it was just one game, like if this is a brand new staff, it's first year with this personnel, people could say, okay, yeah, it's game one, it happens. But I think people have kind of like a PTSD from last year where they're saying this is just carryover from last year. Mm-hmm. And especially with the offensive line, which was probably the biggest topic of conversation last year. So A, is it a continuation of last year, or should we just kind of let it stand on its own? And B, like what are the issues with the offensive line as far as why they're not getting, or at least in this game, didn't get consistent push?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a valid question. Is this game 1 or is this game 14?
Yeah.
Like some people will see it as game 1. Many people will see it as game 14. The cop-out easy answer is that the truth is in the middle, because whenever you have a fan base and whenever you have people with very strong opinions, the truth is almost always in the middle. It's never the full, extremely passionate, thought process this direction or this direction. Mm-hmm. It's, yes, they deserve another week or two to show if they can improve. But yes, you can't sit here and blindly just ignore that there were some of the same issues present Saturday that we saw much of last year. So why not both? I think it's both. In this case, my biggest question, or my biggest sort of thing is like, all right, can this be fixed? And how do you fix it? Is it at what point? And I don't think it's this week, Chris, but I could see, trying to think of how to say this. You have more options to fix this thing this year than you did last year.
Yep.
And I know these are your veteran guys on the offensive line. I get it. And I know they've earned the start at this point. They've worked incredibly hard to get to this point. But how quickly do you hit the shuffle button on the offensive line? That would be, I don't know if we're there yet, but you can't let it go too far into the season.
Yeah.
Is that valid?
It's very valid. And I fall in the middle of that too, because if there's a receiver out there that you've noticed, struggled in perimeter blocking in game 1, maybe you have to look at it and you might have to narrow his role down, maybe, like you said, you look at some shuffles in your personnel up front. We don't know that yet. I mean, obviously Ja'Kai Moore came in the game when Jalen Nichols went down with injury, and that was by all accounts, a fairly close battle. But do you take a look at some other guys in practice or in a game? Maybe so. I think I'm going to go back to this in terms of the offensive line for this year, this game, in terms of inside running. I still don't think people have talked enough about losing Kevin Harris and Zaquandre White just because of the presence of a healthy Marshawn Lloyd, having Juju McDowell, adding CBS, who obviously didn't play in game one as a transfer, is still a significant thing. You're talking about a guy who was one of the best backs in the country in 2020, and then Zaquandre White, who did a great job last year as well, and Kevin Harris came on towards the end of last year. You look at the rushers that they had for game one, Marshawn and Juju, those are both more of outside runners. Maybe that was part of the game plan. But no doubt, regardless of who they got at running back, when Christian Beal-Smith, who may return for Arkansas, or it's Juju or whoever it may be, they are going to have more success running the football, both up the middle and on the perimeter. Both will be important. And we didn't see a lot of that in game one. So I think we're back kind of at that point where you don't really know what the answers are or kind of why it's here. And I don't think this offensive line is top 5 in the conference in terms of talent. I don't think that. I don't think the offense overall is. But it does have to be better than what we saw in game one. I also am not going to go to the extreme of saying this is just game 14, because there are differences from that, namely in personnel. And personnel did have a lot to do with what we saw last season too, namely at quarterback. So it'll be interesting. I think we'll have a better sense after the Arkansas game, first SEC opponent. More probably, I guess you could say, evenly matched in terms of the body types, the talent level. And so we'll know a lot more. Shane Beamer also cited his dad, biggest improvements come from game 1 to game 2. So they probably we should give them the opportunity to, we shouldn't write the story of this team on offense after game 1 or the defense or the special teams. I think it was one game. It gave us some data, still a lot to learn.
Yeah. And I mean, I think you have an opportunity to go clean things up now that you've seen your issues against another opponent. It is, as much as you try, it can be hard against yourself to necessarily know. And, man, I mean, this is a Georgia State team. We knew their strengths were going to be on the line of scrimmage. And I think we wondered, what does that mean for South Carolina? You expect to be bigger, stronger than this group. But Georgia State, give them a little bit of credit in this. They did go out and do their jobs defensively. I'm in no way saying that means it's okay from the South Carolina perspective. But give them a little bit of part of the credit, at least. I mean, they down the stretch, not playing against SEC teams now. I think they allowed 70-something yards on the ground in their bowl game. They allowed 57 yards on the ground on their final regular season game. I actually have that pulled up right now. Troy rushed for 57 yards on 38 carries for a 1.5 yard average. Their final regular season game last year. Trying to pull up the one, because I was obviously at the game when I was rewatching. I haven't gotten all the way through it, but the announcer said something. It was a crazy stat of how many combined rushing yards they allowed the last few games of the year. Arkansas State, which was not a good football team by any means. This maybe means nothing. They rushed for -3 yards on 26 carries.
It's pretty bad, Wes.
I don't even know. That may be an all-time record for least number of yardage on most carries. But anyway, let's keep it in perspective.
Yeah, I think, man, that, if it's week 8 and week 9, we'll know about what this offense is. We still don't know right now. And to go back to another example I gave earlier, it might be kind of extreme, or some people accuse me of making a bad comparison, but you look at South Carolina's best team ever, 2012. They played Vandy to open that season, and they won. They put up 17 points. I think they won 17-13. I mean, absolutely eked it out. The rest of the season, for the most part, with the exception of, funny enough, the Wofford game, where they also struggled offensively, they're putting up 30 and 40 points a game. Most games. There were a couple outliers in there in conference play. They're putting up a lot of 35s and 40s. Not saying this team is as good as 2012. It's not. Go on record with that. And B, I don't know if this offense can get up to that type of level, where there's a few conference games, maybe they're scoring 35 points. If so, then that's a really good sign. The point is that you can't, in a new season where there's been some changes in terms of personnel and things, I don't think you can just say this is a continuation of last year. If it continues, if we're in week 8 and we're talking about these same things here, then yes, I think that's fair.
Chris, have you dove into Arkansas at all yet, man?
Not a lot, because been totally focused on Georgia State, but now we're rapidly approaching turn the page territory. My first step, Wes, I didn't get to watch much of any of the Arkansas-Cincinnati game.
Same.
Really good game from the parts that I did see. Very, very competitive. I got to sit down and watch that in its entirety is going to be my first step today or tomorrow.
Yeah, the only thing about home games is you do kind of lose that opportunity. But first glance, Rocket Sanders, a guy that we're both very familiar with, really big day at running back for them. And then KJ Jefferson, man, 18 for 26, 223 yards and 3 touchdowns.
Mm-hmm.
Have a day, man. That is impressive against a Cincinnati program that obviously, has been extremely good lately. So that was a nice win for Arkansas, and certainly a game that South Carolina is going to have to play well to win. I tend to think it's going to be tighter than people think at first glance, but that's without watching them. The line on this game opened at right at 8 on Sunday. About right, I think. So we got the whole week to talk about it, though. Reminder, Tuesday will be our evening show. Mike Eva will be doing that. Chris and I will be back 2 o'clock Wednesday afternoon. And by the way, if you didn't catch it on Saturday night, we also have a post-game show now as well that Mike will be doing right after the game ends on Saturdays. So be on the lookout for that. All right, y'all, we're at an hour. For Chris, I'm Wes. Appreciate y'all's support. We got a ton of people on here right now. That is awesome to see. If you're not subscribed to our YouTube page, we're putting out more video than we ever have before. So hit the subscribe button. Obviously, all the YouTube content is free. And check out GamecockCentral.com. That content is not free, but you can join right now. $10 for your first year on GC. We are hitting all-time numbers at this point, so we appreciate the support. Appreciate each and every one of you. Y'all have a good one.